Welcome, everyone. My name is Pete Nevin, and I'm a customer success engineer with the Chrome Enterprise team at Google. And I'd like to talk to you today about the admin console and how to manage Chrome devices and an overview of best practices of Chrome. Remember, if you're listening live and have any questions, please submit them below and we'll be able to answer them live during this session. So a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to start off with some basic terminology, talk about organizational units or OUs and how policies are inherited by OUs. We're going to talk about delegated administration. We're going to talk about Chrome policy management during a live hands-on demo. And we're going to talk about managing applications and extensions on Chrome. So let's start off with a little bit of key terminology and concept here. First off is the idea of a policy. And these are the settings that you can push out as an IT admin to your users and devices. They're defined in the admin console. There are groups of policies that we refer to as user settings and device settings. Second is the admin console itself, or admin.google.com. And that's a single pane of glass that you use to manage your users and devices. And it's also shared by other Google services like G Suite and Meets hardware. The third idea is the idea of the organizational unit, or OU. And this is the container that you use to hold devices, users, and apply settings to. So it allows you that granular control over different groups of users and different groups of devices. And it's a hierarchical structure. So under each organizational unit, you can have sub-OUs that inherit the policies from the parent, and then you can override those policies in inherited settings below. First off, let's talk about some of these settings. As I said, there are two major groups of the settings. We'll talk about some others as well. But first, there are device settings. And device settings control how a device operates. It controls what the use case is for the device. It controls who can log in and how they can access the device. It really controls how the device operates as opposed to what the user experience is like on the device. And the second major category is user settings. These control not how the device works, but the user experience on the device. You can manage apps, extensions, bookmarks. You can manage the security profile for a user, and those settings follow the user from device to device. And generally, these two groups of settings are mutually exclusive. Let's talk a little bit about OUs and policy hierarchy. An OU is a hierarchical structure that starts at the domain root. Underneath the domain root, you can create sub-OUs. And here's a typical configuration that we see at enterprises, where they might have one OU that contains all of the devices. And then underneath that OU are different types of devices or different use cases. So you have a different set of settings for your kiosk devices, from digital sign devices, maybe from devices that you manage to give to employees. And underneath the employees, you might have different groups of OUs for different teams, like legal or finance. And then underneath users, again, you see these functional groups. Finance might have different set of settings and different apps from an engineering team, which might have a different set of apps and security settings from a call center employee. And then often the admins themselves, those user groups are broken off because they'll get a different set of apps. They'll get a different set of permissions. So we talked about user settings. We talked about device settings. User settings control apps and extensions. They control security settings, like whether you allow incognito mode on the browser, whether you force ephemeral mode to wipe the device after each user sign out. Device settings control who can sign into the device. You configure whether or not you're allowing guest mode, control power management on the device. There are also other sets of settings, such as network settings. There an admin can push out a Wi-Fi configuration, can push out certificates and manage those for user devices, and also can push out VPN configurations. Another couple of sets of settings are around two other specific use cases on Chrome. One of those is managed guest, where the user can actually open up a device, start it, and start using it without having to sign in. You can control the length of that managed guest session. You can post a terms of service to the users, or you can manage a URL block list to prevent them getting access to particular sites. And then finally, there's Kiosk. And Kiosk is really a single app that runs in full screen mode. You can control which app runs, you can manage power settings, and even decide to auto launch that app when the device turns on. Under user settings, some of the key features that we'll look at, I'll show you how to push apps and extensions and how to manage those on devices. I'll show you how to enable hardware such as the camera or USB storage. You can route user network traffic through a proxy and generally customize the user experience. Under device settings, some of the key settings: enrollment and access, to manage how the device is enrolled into your domain and what users can get access. You can specify who can sign into that domain who can sign into that device by the domain. You can even choose to autocomplete the domain as convenience to make it easier for users to sign in. And importantly, you control how the device accepts OS updates from Google over time. So now I'm going to launch in and do a live admin console demo and talk through a lot of these concepts and show them to you on screen. And this is known as the home screen. And the first thing you'll notice is that there are a lot of different tiles that grant you access to different areas of the admin console. And you'll see that there's specific tiles for devices, for admin roles, and we're going to go into some of these. But the first rule to understand is that what you see on this home screen and what you have access to in the admin console is all controlled by what permissions and privileges that your user profile has as an IT admin. And so on my domain, where I'm a super admin and I have access to G Suite and certain other features, you may see something different in your admin console. First off, we're going to talk about some of these tiles, and we're going to go and look at specific settings for devices and for security. But as you navigate through the admin console and these tiles, also note that there are other ways to navigate around the admin console as well. First, there's a main menu here in the upper left-hand corner. Sometimes called this the hamburger menu, and that gives you access all the same areas of the admin console that you can get through the tiles. If we come here to devices and drill into Chrome management, you can see there we can get access to the device list. We'll look at managed browsers and look at settings for Chrome devices. We go to directory, you can see users, groups, or you can edit your organizational unit structure. So I'm going to go in and start with looking at security settings. And the first thing that I'll say about security is that the security settings are outside of Chrome. And so these apply not just to devices and not just to Chrome, but it also applies to your G Suite logins and other areas of the admin console as well. So let's take a look at some of the password management policies that are available in Chrome. And again, these apply not just to Chrome, but to your G Suite login as well, if you choose to do so. So the first thing you'll note on all of the admin console screens where you're setting policies and making changes is this layout that you see before you, which is you have your organizational unit structure over here on the left, and you have the policies and settings over here on the right. So you just get into a rhythm where you choose the OU that you want to edit, you come over, make the change that you want to make, and then down at the bottom of the page, you can save it. And so just you get that three-step process: choose the OU, make your setting, and then save the setting. So let's look at a few of the settings on password management. You can enforce strong passwords. You can define a minimum and maximum length of a password, and be aware that these are policies that apply to the user that's logging into the device. And so you'll want to choose the proper OU based on where your users are located. And again, it gives you the granular control to set different policies for different groups of users if you need to. We've got the ability to allow password reuse and then even set an expiration time for that password so that they'll have to reset the password and choose a new password after a certain period of time. Again, choose the OU, make the policy change, and then save that change. Okay, now I'm going to go look at another area of security. And that is to set up single sign-on for your user settings. And so you can give your users the ability to manage their password within Chrome, but a lot of enterprises, they'll want to use an existing identity provider and a single sign-on solution. And you can set that up with the admin console. I'm going to scroll down, and we're going to go and look at how you would set up the admin console if you had a third-party identity provider, something like Okta or Ping or ADFS. So we click in here. The first thing you should understand and see is that there's the ability to configure one ID provider. You don't see organizational units here. There's no way to granularly choose which ID provider. So we do restrict you at this point to only using one identity provider at a time on your domain. You can granularly apply single sign-on either on or off for different groups of users, but it's going to be this one ID provider that you configure here in security. So if we wanted to set up single sign-on, we click this on, and the primary fields that you see need to be filled out: sign in page URL, sign out page URL, upload a certificate if necessary, apply network masks, and a change password URL. So these three URLs are the primary policies and settings that allow you to integrate with an existing online ID provider, again, like Okta or Ping. And what you'll see is you'll see the actual sign-in screen for that identity provider show up as the Chrome login screen. And so when you sign into that login screen, you'll get access directly to the single sign-on provider and all the federated applications. Okay, so that's what I wanted to point out in security. Now we're going to go take a look at delegated admin. I'm going to go back to the home screen. And I'm going to come over here to this tile indicating admin roles. So when I take a look at the admin roles page, what you'll notice is there are a number of different roles, which basically consist of a set of permissions or page level access, and those permissions being granted to specific admins on a given area of the OU. And you'll see there's both built-in system roles as well as custom roles. So let's take a look at one of these particular permissions. The user management admin role consists of a number of admin console privileges and then admins that are assigned those privileges. You can also copy a role to make a new custom role. So we take a look at some of the privileges that are enabled on this particular role. You look and you see that this role is able to read organizational units, ostensibly so that you can see the organizational units to create users. You're able to read, create, update, move users, rename them, etc. So this is a user management role. If, say, your organization was broken into regional districts, say you have an office in Boston, an office in Atlanta, and an office in Denver, you may want to grant access for your IT admins to create and manage users only within their office. And you can do that with delegated admin. You can create the Boston OU. You can grant access to that specific OU to your IT admins in that office, and then they'll be able to manage just the user in that office and not be able to manage the users in the other offices. So in addition to privileges, we can come over here and look at the admins that are assigned this role. If you want to assign a new user to this role, click in, you type, find a name, select the name, select where in the organizational unit you want to grant this permission, and then assign that role. And you'll see they show up in the list. And so this is a list of all the different users and all the areas of the organizational unit where they have that particular role. Now I'm going to go over and look at some different settings. I'm going to jump to the home screen and we're going to talk about networking. So on the home screen, you'll note that there's a devices tab, and under the devices tab is where you get networking settings and all the other policies we're going to look at. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do in showing off the devices settings is to go over to the devices page. And you'll see here, there's the opportunity to manage a number of different types of devices. Of course, in this console, in this demonstration, we're focusing on Chrome devices, but you'll also see there's the EMM for managing mobile devices, Google Meeting Room hardware, Jamboards, etc. So the first thing we're going to look at on this screen is network settings. And you'll notice that the network settings is here on this devices tab. Outside of Chrome, it applies to multiple types of devices. So as we create these network settings, you can see that they might apply to different types of devices. So I'm going to click into networks, and you'll see here that you as the admin have the ability to push different types of network configurations to your Chrome devices. Wi-Fi configurations, Ethernet configurations, VPNs, push certificates, and then there's some general settings around networks for Chromebooks, whether they auto-connect, restrict Wi-Fi networks, or restrict or allow specific network interfaces on those Chromebooks. And remember, this is the way that an admin can push a network configuration. So the admin may be pushing out the corporate Wi-Fi network, maybe pushing out a corporate Ethernet configuration, but the user can also create these configurations locally on the device themselves. So if you give someone a Chromebook that they take into the office and they make use of the corporate Wi-Fi within the office, when they take that same device home and they're on their home Wi-Fi, they can just configure that home Wi-Fi locally. So let's click in and look at a Wi-Fi network. And you'll see here, again, these different network settings can apply to different types of devices. For Chromebooks specifically, Chromebooks and Chromeboxes, you can push these networks by user, or you can push them by device. And the difference there being that if you push a network configuration by user, that network configuration will follow a user from device to device and be available no matter which device you're managing that they have access to. If you're pushing that Wi-Fi configuration by device, then the configuration will reside on the device and it'll be available to any user that uses that device. So as an example, we'll click in and talk about a Chromebook, a Wi-Fi configuration for a Chromebook by user. And the details down here below, you give this a name, like this might be the corp network, and it's you indicate the SSID, whether the SSID is broadcast, whether you want the user to automatically connect, and then there's a number of security settings. So there's a security type. You see we support a number of different security settings, WEP, WPA, 802.1x, configurations. If you choose one of these, then it will change the options around authentication protocols. And you'll see that we have support for a number of different authentication protocols. PEEP, EAP, TLS are two of the common ones that we see in enterprises. And then you can pass in, as part of that authentication, you can pass in, use variables to pass in the username and password that the user has on the device, et cetera, just to make the logging in process much easier. If there's a default certificate authority that's being used, check for that. You can pass in proxy settings. You want to manually configure a proxy, automatically configure proxies, DNS settings, et cetera. So you can enter these settings in and push this to your users as the network configuration. Similarly, there's Ethernet networks. So you can configure an Ethernet network, again, by user, by device, give it a name, and you'll see that it has, same thing. You're going to select an authentication protocol, look at different types of authentication protocols that are supported, and look at different ways to pass in information to identify the user and identify how they are going to log into that network. Okay. I think the last thing is just to look at some of these general configurations. As I said, you can only allow managed networks to auto connect. So the device will only connect to managed network configurations. You can enable or disable specific network interfaces. It just depends on how you want to manage users' access to the network. And again, with all of these settings, we're going to go over here, select the OU we want to impact, make this change, and then save that change. Okay, I'm going to go back to device management, and we're going to talk a little bit more about specific settings and pages for Chrome management. I'm going to click in here to Chrome management, and this gives you the menu that really contains most of the settings and most of the pages that you'll access in managing your Chrome fleet. I'm going to start off by looking at the device list, and that's under this first item, devices, which gives you a list of all the devices on the domain. And you can filter and sort. You can search for specific devices. You can look at their status. Right now, I'm just looking at all organizational units, all devices that are of a provision status. And you can change that to look at devices that have been deprovisioned, or you can filter by OU and just look at a specific OU. This gives you a list of all the devices that you've selected. There's also now an option to export that list, so you can get a CSV file containing all the metadata that you see if you want to upload that into another system or do some analytics on it. If you click in on the serial number, you'll get to the device details page for this particular device. The first thing you see is there's a lot of information about the device at the top. What's the Chrome OS version, serial number, MAC address, the time of enrollment, etc. In addition, it has the auto update expiration, the AOE date, which is how long before this device stops taking updates. So important information there. There are a couple of custom fields here. These are fields that you can fill out either at enrollment time or after the fact and help you manage your fleet. You can add asset ID, add a location, there's a notes field, or you can use these custom fields for storing other data that's helpful for managing your fleet. And then down at the bottom, there's a little bit of activity data, some troubleshooting data. You might look at the last known CPU utilization, memory usage, IP address will show up here, disk space usage. So this just helps you keep status on specific details around specific devices within the fleet. And then the last thing I want to show you on this page are these commands you see on the left. And here are a couple of things you can do to a device remotely. I'm going to point out two and describe those: disable and deprovision, which are two different commands you can do remotely to your device. Typically, it's sort of towards end of life, or when the device is lost and stolen. You will want to disable that device. Essentially, that renders the device so that it can't be signed into. And if it's turned on, the screen will just display a configurable message. You can put in your address or an email address or phone number to contact, indicating that the device is inoperable and they should contact this phone number to get instructions to return the device. Deprovision is what you do with a device when it's at the end of life, maybe after the AUE date, or if you decide you want to deprovision the device, remove it from your enterprise, remove the policies, and perhaps donate to a school, you would deprovision the device. And that effectively takes it out of your domain, out of management, and allows the device to be used for some other purpose. All right, now I'm going to jump back to that Chrome management menu, and we've got a couple of more screens to talk about. I want to look at device settings. And device settings are these policies that we talked about early in this presentation. These are the settings that you can apply as an administrator. Again, based on OU structure, based on the hierarchy, you can have these policies set at the level of an OU or inherited from the parent. And I really want to talk about is the first policy, is the first one that shows up on the list, and that's forced re-enrollment. And forced re-enrollment is a policy, really is the table stakes policy that indicates that you want this device under management, because forced re-enrollment means that a device can't be merely wiped and moved out of your domain and re-enrolled in another domain. So forced re-enrollment is a policy that makes sure that device stays locked to your domain. And you'll see there's a few different settings, a few different options around here. We're working on a feature to automatically re-enroll the device, but essentially you want to force the device to re-enroll with some credentials into this domain after it's been wiped. And again, this will prevent a user from just taking the device, wiping it, and using it on their own or using it under a different domain. Some other device policies I think are important to go over are OS update policies, and you'll see you have some filtering and searching capability up here in this in the toolbar. And device update settings, as you may know, Chrome has a rhythm that every 6 weeks we have a new release, a new major milestone. And so we may be on version 83 now as the latest stable version, and version 84 will be in beta. Version 85 will be in the dev channel. These are different channels, release channels. Stable considered to be the most tested and most appropriate for the vast majority of your fleet. Every 6 weeks, in 6 weeks, 84 will become the stable. And then 6 weeks later, 85 becomes the stable. And so there are a number of different settings on how you want to allow your fleet to take on these updates. The first is just a general setting, again, by OU, as to whether you want to allow auto updates, allow the device to reach out and download those updates automatically and apply them, or whether you want to stop auto updates. And this may be something that you implement. You may start to take an update, realize that there's some incompatibility or there's a bug in the update that impacts some of your users. So you could stop auto updates, give time for the app developer to work through that incompatibility, or give Google a chance to fix whatever bug it is that's causing the problem. And then you can just allow auto updates and it'll take the next update. You see here under strict Google Chrome version, you're able to not only take just the latest stable, but if you want, you can pin an OU to a specific version. And you can pin backwards up to 3 versions older than the latest stable, as you see here. And this might, again, be, you may have a version that you've tested in your enterprise, and we have enterprise customers that will do this. They will test maybe one version behind stable and just stay pinned to that previous version. Rather than risk having a bug come in, they'll stay on a version that's prior to the latest stable. There's another provision here. If you have a site with thousands of Chromebooks on, you may not want all of those devices to reach out to the update server and download a 0.5 gigabyte payload OS update. And so you can scatter those updates over a certain number of days. You can say scatter over a week, and 1/7 of your fleet will take that update each day. All right, in addition to that, I want to talk about the OS channels. So show you that. We'll search here. And here you can see, again, by OU, you can select, click into a different OU. You can choose by OU to set the channel that you want the devices in that OU. And here's how you would create an OU, put maybe your power users, your stakeholders, or some number of users. We recommend between 5 and 10% of your fleet on the beta channel, so they'll actually see the OS updates prior to them hitting the remainder of your fleet. So we see this as a best practice in enterprises. 90 to 95% of your fleet, you want to be on the stable channel, but retain, some small number, 5 or 10% on beta channels, so that if there is going to be, an incompatibility with a critical business app, you'll identify that prior to it hitting the rest of your fleet. And then one last set of policies that I'll show on the device side is we talked about how users can sign in. And so there's a number of different ways you can allow a guest mode, or you can disable a guest mode that would enable a user to use the device without signing in. You can see that you can apply sign-in restrictions. So you can restrict sign-in to your devices only to addresses or only to accounts that come from your domain or from a list of domains. And then also there's this policy autocomplete to domain. And so this will pre-populate a domain onto the login screen, so the user just has to type the prefix. So that's a nice little convenience policy there. Okay, you'll see up here the tab, there's a few different types of settings. We said we'd talk about device settings. I want to also talk about user and browser settings. So I'll click over there. And the first thing to note, obviously, is that it is user and browser settings. And that means that the policies here have a lot of overlap with policies that control the user experience in Chrome OS, as well as policies that apply to browser instances on Chrome OS and other platforms like Mac, Linux, and Windows. And if you're using Chrome Browser Cloud Management, CBCM, which is the use of the admin console to manage your browser instances, you can see that a lot of these same policies overlap with policies. So this is kind of your one way of single pane of glass to manage the user experience across multiple platforms, across Chrome OS, across Mac, across Windows, and be able to configure common sets of policies, security policies for those browsers. All right, the first thing I'm going to talk about is there's some enrollment controls that have to do with the Chrome devices. And I want to talk about one in particular is this device enrollment option. When you're using a user credential to enroll a device, this policy distinguishes between two different operations. One would be just to keep the device at its current location. For a new device, that would be the root of the OU structure. But alternately, you can set the policy so that the Chrome device moves to the same OU as the user, where the user is in that organizational unit structure. And so if you're using a service provider, white glove service provider, to enroll your devices for you, this is a way that you could give them multiple enrollment credentials for users across different areas of your OU structure and have the devices automatically enrolled and moved into the proper place so that they'll get the right set of policies right from the beginning. Also, you'll see that there's the ability to, we talked about that asset identifier and location information as being custom fields. You can include that as part of the enrollment process. So again, if you have your white glove service provider enrolling devices, or your IT department is enrolling devices, as they enroll them, you can have them enter the asset ID right then, and you'll have an easy way to identify those devices in your admin console as you manage them. The last sort of set of settings that I'll point out on the user side are security settings. And some of the security settings you'll see are around Chrome safe browsing. You can enable Chrome variations. There are also a few security settings related to the user experience. If we scroll down, site isolation, you can turn that on or off for websites. You can choose to allow the user to use password manager. You can allow the user to use incognito mode or to block access to incognito mode for your users. And also to enable this force ephemeral mode, which is a somewhat popular setting, which means that when a user signs off the device, it'll erase all the local user data and basically wipe the history and things like that from the device, so that you reduce the risk of someone else getting access to the personal information on the device. All right, so I think that's all I was going to talk about settings. And now I'll jump back over to Chrome. We talk about app management. Okay, so to manage apps and extensions in Chrome in the admin console, we're going to click down here on apps and extensions and go over to the screen for app management. And the first thing you'll notice, there's, again, multiple tabs up here. We're going to focus on the users and browsers tab, which is how you manage apps and push apps and block apps for signed in users. We've talked about these other use cases, kiosks and managed guest sessions. Those are other use cases that we're not focused on today, but that's how you would manage apps for those use cases where a user is not signing in. So again, these apply to both users and browsers. So if you have browser instances you're managing through Chrome Browser Cloud Management, you can install extensions on those browsers this way. But we're going to focus in on the installation of apps via the various marketplaces that Chrome allows. So the first thing to note is that the applications that we do manage, they do follow the user's profile. So as a user moves from device to device, they'll get the same sets of apps downloaded from the cloud and have access to the same user experience no matter which device. So this is good for a shareability type use case. The other thing you'll note, for each OU, there's a overall setting which controls how applications are managed within this OU at a high level. And you'll see the choices there that you can choose to block all apps and extensions, in which case the users will only be able to access the apps that the IT admin manages here in the management console. Or you can choose to allow apps. So you can allow users to go and discover and install their own apps. And you can do that, all apps and extensions, other apps from the Google Play Store, other apps from the Chrome Web Store. And we'll look at that in just a second. So it's just important to note that there's an overall, do you want to choose to block everything and then just allow certain applications for users, or do you want to generally allow applications and then just block specific applications? So you'll note that over here on the yellow plus button, this is how we add a new application, and you'll see that there are several different ways to add applications. The first here is the Chrome Web Store. That's Chrome apps and Chrome extensions. You have the Google Play Store, so you can add supported Android apps. There's the ability to add an extension by ID. This is if you have your own custom app that you've built. And then finally, there is add by URL, which refers to progressive web apps. And you'll note the difference in those. We've got examples of each here. If you see a URL here, it indicates that it is a PWA. This long ID associated with the Citrix workspace, that indicates it's a Chrome app. And if you have an Android-looking package name like com.slack, that indicates it's an Android app. If it's a private app, you'll see this icon over here and the ID for that private app. So let's take a quick look at what it looks like to configure a new app. I'm going to come down here and click on Chrome Web Store. And it'll bring up a list of applications, and you can search for applications. I'm going to go ahead and type in Netflix, and you'll see you have you can search for apps, you can filter apps. I'm going to select the Netflix Party extension for this OU, and you'll see that now you have the choices to allow this app. You can choose to force install the app, which means it'll be installed on every device within this OU, and the user can't remove it. You can also choose to force install the app and pin it to the taskbar so it's always readily available and visible to the user. Or if you're allowing all apps, you could choose to block this. So I'm going to go ahead and force install and pin, save that change. And now when we go back out, you'll see that Netflix Party shows up in the list. Similar with an Android app, basically the same order of operations. You choose the Play Store, you get a search area where you can search for applications in the Play Store. You choose a specific app, let's say WhatsApp Messenger, select, and again, you get those same controls. You can choose to allow the installation of this app for your users. You can force install and pin, or block. I'll go ahead and force install this one and save the change. We'll go back out, see WhatsApp. The last thing I'll point out, you see that there are configurations over here on the right. Different apps may support different configurations. And I'm going to take Citrix Workspace as an example. There are a few permissions that you can change from OU to OU, and then a number of apps will support managed configuration or specific configuration that you can change from OU to OU, and allows you to get more granular with which of these managed configurations you push out to your users. Citrix, for example, you may have a different gateway that you want your users in North America to use versus your users in EMEA may use a different gateway. And so you use the Citrix JSON to specify what those gateways are and how you want your users to use them. And it's up to the application developers to understand, support these managed configurations and provide the syntax that they need to be provided in. Thank you for joining today. If you have additional questions, please email chromeonair@google.com. And don't forget to register for these upcoming webinars. On July 30th, we'll be doing a webinar on support and troubleshooting on Chrome.